Hello everyone, this is Astocky. Welcome to another video that's Minecraft related. This is going to be a more comprehensive look at how to create a Tekkit server, and it's basically going to cover a few things that were covered either in the last two videos or in a lot of the comments for the videos, because there's a number of common problems that people are having, and not all of those have been clearly spelt out in the actual last two videos. So this is going to try and cover everything and hopefully not be too long and too long-winded. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to download the Tekkit server files. So basically you come to this website just here, and I will put that in the description, and then you scroll down, and what you want is you want a copy of Tekkit 2.1.1. So we'll scroll down, don't worry about the client, here. So we click on this file just here, and that will give us the download that we're looking for, and I will download that and I will save it in my Minecraft mods folder where I know where that is. So then the next thing that I do, now this is a completely optional step, but I found that it's absolutely the easiest way to do it, especially if it's going to be a small network, is to go to this website here, which gives you the download for Logmein Hamachi. That is just by far the simplest way for most people to set up a network that people can connect to over the internet. Now, I guess something that's been very clear for those of you who've tried to connect to my server is that the free version of Logmein Hamachi will only allow 8 people to be connected at a time. If any more people try and connect, the system will just not allow them. It'll tell them there's too many already. Now, what connected means is that they have previously connected to the network. So if someone connects once and then turns their computer off, they stay connected. So what you have to do is you have to actually physically go in and right click on the person and evict them off the network if you don't want them to be there. They can reconnect later on by just putting in the same details, but certainly at the time it will basically just kick them off the network. So I've already got that downloaded and installed, but I will run you through how to install the Tekkit. And then you can also see in the background here I've got a bucket tab open, because I'm going to show you how to add plugins and things as well on this. So now that we've downloaded all our files, as you can see there, first thing we need to do is go to where it was downloaded and get a copy of it. So that's my file just there. I'm going to put that up one level because this is where I want to have it. And then you need to extract it. Now it's very important that you don't extract it into the same area where your Tekkit or Technic pack is installed. You need to extract it in a totally different separate area. So once you can see that it comes up, and it basically opens up a whole lot of files. Now this is key because a lot of people have problems with this. Because you are running a Tekkit 2.1.1 server, it is a requirement that you have Java 64-bit installed on your machine. Now there are a number of people who get a mod error saying that there's a whole lot of mods that can't load correctly. That's caused by having Java 6, not Java 7 installed. There's also another error that you can get, and I'll go to that in a minute, but you can also get an error talking about loading a 32-bit DLL on a 64-bit machine. So we'll bring up our browser again. We'll come right back to the very top. You can see on the left-hand side here, there is Java for 32-bit Windows and Java for 64-bit Windows. If you have 64-bit Windows, you have to have Java 64-bit installed for version 7. What I've found that some people have done is they've installed Java 7 32-bit on a 64-bit machine, and that causes a number of problems. So here you can see other download links. So I won't post those in the video. They will be here for when you download the Tekkit server. What I will do though is, you won't actually see all of this at the moment because it's a bit out of video, but I'm opening up my start menu and typing CMD to bring up a command prompt. This is something that I do before I try and run the server to make sure that it works. Type in Java space dash version, and it will show you what you currently have installed. So you can see here I have build 1.7, and what that means is I'm running Java 7. You can see on the next line that it says 64-bit, so that means I have the Java correctly configured for my machine. If you were to get this message, which is, and ignore the B, I just put that in so it would come up, but if you type in Java and it comes up, is not recognized as an internal or external command, operable program or batch file, There will be a link in my description for how to configure your paths in Windows to fix that. I'm sorry again for Mac OS users, I don't know how to do that, but this will at least help people who are using Windows to configure it so that it runs correctly, and when you type this you get the same message that I get. So now the final thing that could happen when you go to run your server is you get a memory error. And so what I'm going to do is, just to demonstrate how that would work, this is not a step that you need to do, I'll change this to 12 gigabytes, which is well more than the amount of memory that I have. And what this will do is this will demonstrate the error that you might get. So if I now try to run the system, it works. Okay, that was very unexpected, that should not have worked. What will probably happen now is once the server starts running, it will probably crash. I'm just going to stop that before it gets too carried away. So I'm going to delete that folder now because that was a bad demonstration of how it should have worked, and I'm just going to extract it again. Again, this isn't required, I'm just doing this for the demonstration purpose. And let's make the minimum 12 and the maximum 13. That way it'll definitely not work. Okay, so you can see the error. Error occurred during initialization of virtual machine, could not reserve enough space for object heap. That particular error there will be most common if you are running on a 32-bit machine, because the default settings for the Tekkit as you download it from the website is maximum amount of memory 3 gigabytes, standard amount of memory 2 gigabytes. Now the problem with that is Java on a 32-bit machine can't reserve more than about 1.5 gig. It's just the way Java's configured, it won't let you do that. It doesn't matter whether you have 4 gig or 8 gig on a 32-bit machine, Java will be limited to about 1.5 gig. So the way I configure this on my 32-bit machine is I change that number there to 1 gig, and I change that number there to 1.5 gig, and then I run it. And if I get the same error, then I change that to 1.4 gig, and then I run it again, and then I change it to 1.3. Of course, on a 64-bit machine like the one that I have and I'll be demonstrating on, I can just leave these at the standard values and I won't have too much trouble. This is one area where it makes quite a lot of difference what you have configured, because for the standard Technic pack to run it as a single player, or to run Tekkit pack as a client to connect to, anywhere around about 512 meg is plenty. 1 gig is normally well more than you need. For the server, servers eat lots of memory. I have a 5-slot server configured, and I basically use up 1.25 gig pretty consistently. So it's really important to limit the number of players that you have if you're running on a 32-bit machine. It could be possible to run 10 players on a 32-bit machine, but in my experience 5 players is almost at the limit of what you can do. So now that I have this file correctly configured, and you would configure that differently again depending on what your system is, you double click on it and it will run. And you need it to run the first time. That's the first time that it runs, it will configure the configuration files and it will set up a spawn. That spawn's not particularly important, you'll more than likely change that, but note these warning messages that have come up. They're basically just saying it can't find certain files, and then it creates them for you because it couldn't find them. Okay, so some really important things. If we scroll back up, you can see just here that it says this server is running CraftBucket version 1.1-R4. That's very important. Later on when we go to the plugin website here, you'll want to make sure that you download plugins for the correct version to make sure that they work. So 1.1-R4 is the version that you want to get the plugins for. So what I'll do now that it's run, I will stop. And I will go back to my server area. So you can see that it created these 3 areas here called world. I'm going to delete those because I don't want that. And it created all these text files that basically tell you how everything is working. So again, if you've got Java 7 installed and you've edited the memory correctly, you should not have any problems in getting that to run. Now that the system has run once, what we can do is we can open up these text files and you will see that there is absolutely nothing in them. That's because you haven't configured it yet. The first file that you need to configure is server properties. Now you'll probably have to go open with and tell it you want to choose a default program and go to Notepad or something like that. I use Notepad++, so I don't really have that problem. So here is the most basic set of configuration files. The line, actually I'll start from the top and work my way down. This allow nether equals true is the first line. If you say false for that line, it will turn off the end realm and it will turn off the nether as well. That's pretty important, particularly if you have a server that has low memory, because what you can do is you can turn off nether and the end, and that will keep people in a smaller region with one world active, which will reduce some of the memory requirements. But generally I leave that true. The next thing you want to do is you want to change this level name to be what you want it to be. In this case I want to call it test. Enable query, I don't exactly know what that does. I've never had to change it though from leaving it as false, so I will continue to leave that as false. This allow flight, it is pretty important on a Tekkit server that you make that true. And the reason for that is because there are a number of power items in equivalent exchange and in industrial craft that let you fly, and if you have that as false, the server could think that the person is cheating and could kick them off the server. This next one here is the default port that Minecraft runs on. The only reason you would need to change that is if you're trying to use port forwarding and for some reason the system doesn't allow you to use that particular port. I'm not going to go into port forwarding. Know that port forwarding works perfectly, and if you don't want to use Hamachi, it's probably the best way to get things going. I use Hamachi because it's just much simpler, so I don't have to change that. This particular line here allows you to create a super flat world if you want, but generally you just want to leave that as default. And same with the next one, there's no need to change that. Now we're getting into some of the details that again you can change if you want to, but you don't need to. I like to leave level seed blank, unless of course you've had a world in the past and you really like the seed for it, in which case you might want to use it again. Server IP I'm going to skip for a moment and I will come back to that. Spawn NPCs true. That doesn't make that much difference in Minecraft 1.1 because the NPCs don't really do anything, but it kind of becomes more important with 1.2.3 and things like that. But basically that spawns test certificates at the moment. Whitelist false. Your options there are false or true. If you want to restrict who can access your server, you change that to true. In this particular case, this is not going to be an online server, it's just going to be me, so I'm going to leave it as false. Spawn animals, that spawns the passive mobs. Online mode true. If you change that to false, any person can connect to your server with any username they choose to sort of put in, and there's no way of verifying they are who they say they are, so I always leave that as true to make sure you at least know who people are. The next one is player versus player. I like to have that as false. There are a number of really good plugins for bucket servers that allow you to set specific areas where PvP is possible. I'm not going to be going into those, but if you look at the bucket development website, which is the link that I have here and I will be going to in a second, you can leave that as true but set it up so it only works in certain areas, so you can have battle arenas and things like that, for example. I'm not going to go into that, I'm going to leave it as false. Difficulty sets the difficulty, whether it is on peaceful, easy, normal or hard. I like to leave it as the default one. I believe that corresponds with easy. Game mode 0. Game mode 0 for survival, game mode 1 would be for creative. Max players. Like I said, based on the way I configure the system, you really are limited to try and keep the amount of RAM from going over what your system has and causing errors. So I like to keep the players down when I'm running on like a small server. But really, if you are running on a 64-bit server with the 2 gig, 3 gig option, you could probably put, I think it works out something along the lines of about 256 meg per person that's connected. There's a bit of overhead though if you only have 1 or 2 people connected, so you probably need a minimum of a gigabyte, and from there you can probably fit 1 player per 256 meg. The limitation that I have at the moment though, which is why I would stick with 5 even on my 64-bit system, is upload speed. You need about 512 kilobits per second of upload speed for your network connection per player that you have. Plus, because your server if you're running it locally like I am, takes up one of those slots. With 5 players, I can pretty much use up all the bandwidth on a 3 megabit upload, and that's what I'm limited to with my service provider. So 5 players is pretty much it for me. Next line is obvious, whether you want to spawn mobs or not, hostile mobs that is. The next one is the view distance. You pretty much never need to change this number. You can up it a little bit if you want, and what that does is it then buffers more information and sends more chunks to people. That way, if there's a little bit of lag on the internet connection, they still have all the information loaded around them that it shouldn't cause too many problems. If you're having lots of problems with overloading your bandwidth, you can even try reducing that a little bit. That way you won't send as much information to the players, but there could be some graphical glitches if they have their view distance on far. Generate structures talks about whether you wish to generate nether fortresses, mine shafts, ravines, all those sorts of things. And the last line is what they will see as the name of your server when they connect to it. So that's pretty much the default. You can change that, it doesn't really make any difference. So back to the one that I was going to get back to, server IP. For today's testing, I'm going to leave that number blank because I don't want anyone other than me to connect to it. But if you had Hamachi running, like you can see here, you would type in there the IP that Hamachi has assigned you for that network. So if I put 5.223.204.174 in that server IP box, that would enable people connected to the same Hamachi network as me to connect to it. If you were port forwarding, you would type in whatever your IP that's assigned to you by your internet service provider would be what you would type in there, or you can leave it blank and it will auto assign to whatever your current IP is. Auto assigning generally works fairly well, but if it's problematic, you know what you need to type in there. So that's that configuration file done. Do I want to save? Yes. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run the server again. It's going to generate the spawn area, so you can see it's creating those files there, test, test nether, and test the end. And you can see it has now successfully loaded with no warnings and no errors. That's pretty much standard, and the reason for that is there is a plugin that's sort of added by default called Recipe Manager, and I haven't set up any custom recipes, so that's not actually an error. That's just letting you know that you haven't created any. So everything else though ran as expected with no problems. So what I can do now is I can go to my Tekkit launcher, which is downloaded from the same website, the Tekkit website. You can see here, client is downloaded through the launcher, the Windows launcher, or the Mac and Linux launcher. Because you're connecting to a 2.1 server, you need to go into options here and make sure you select always use development builds and that it says 2.1.0. If you try and connect and it comes up with an error saying that there was a problem that mods could not be found or the wrong mods were not installed, then that's because you've selected that wrong option. So now we click login. The system will boot up. It'll go through its little process of connecting. This should all be painless and straightforward and should work. If there's a problem with that, it means that's not an issue with your server. If this comes up with an error, that means that there is a problem with your Tekkit client install, and you basically need to just reinstall the Tekkit launcher and get that to run again. So I will do multiplayer. I can't connect to my other server because it's not on at the moment, but what I will do here is direct connect to localhost, which will automatically take the IP address of this machine, and then I will connect to the port that we put in before. So you can see here I have now logged in to my new Tekkit server that I just created, and everything is working. When you open up not enough items, even if you put it in cheat mode, you'll notice you can't spawn items in because the way the servers are configured is you need to be a server op to be able to configure things, and by default there is not a single person that is an op on the server. So the way you fix that is you open back up the server window, and for example you type op, in my case Astocky, and I am now an op, and if I go to cheat mode I should be able to spawn items in. What might have to happen is I might have to disconnect and then reconnect. Because sometimes the system needs to refresh itself to know that it's going to work. So there you go. So now I can start spawning items in and doing lots of other cool things. So that's pretty much how to create a server and how to connect to a basic, vanilla is the wrong word, but a basic Tekkit server. What I'm going to do now is just really quickly go into some basics of plugins. So that was not the button I meant to hit. In the Bucket website just here, which is Bucket Dev, because we're using a development version, there is a categories button. If you click the categories, it gives you all the different kinds of categories of mods that you can get. The basic ones that I use are under, I believe it's under anti-griefing. I've currently got installed on my server, which I only installed yesterday and I'm still learning exactly how it works, is grief protection. Basically what grief protection does is it allows a person to claim a small area of land around whatever they're building, and unless they authorize people, no one else can destroy any of the blocks that they've built or interact with any of the blocks that they're built. It does not always work with mod blocks, which is a bit unfortunate. So things like equivalent exchange collectors and alchemical chests and things like that may not always be protected, but if you create like some walls around it and put it inside a building that's a vanilla building and then configure like an iron door or something like that, they then won't be able to get in, because levers and buttons and things that are within your protected area can only be accessed by people that you've selected to trust. Now before I was talking about the particular version that the Tekkit 2 server is running, and I said that that was really important. That's because if you look here at the download links, you will see all these download links are for CraftBucket 1.2.3. If you try and use these plugins with the Tekkit server, they'll crash the server. So what you have to do is come to the top here and click on Files, and you have to scroll down until you find the particular version that we have, which was 1.1 R4. So version 2 of this grief protection is the version you would need to use in order to get it to work. If you try using a more recent 1.1 build, so R6, it might work, but you might also get a lot of Java errors. You will almost certainly get class and Java errors if you try and use a 1.23 version. So that's grief protection. The next one that I almost always use is Creeper Heal. Hopefully this will come up when I search for it. There we go. Now what this particular program or plugin does is it takes creepers, ghasts, TNT, fire, and anything else that causes any kind of block damage, and what it does is it waits a configurable amount of time after that block damage has occurred and starts repairing the blocks. So basically what this does is, and the reason I like it is because it makes creepers still scary, because they can still blow you up, they can still blow holes in your buildings, and if you've got a cobble machine or something like that, it can still do lots of damage to your base and lots of damage to you, but then you can know that later on those blocks will all repair themselves back. So I guess it kind of keeps the scariness of creepers in, but it kind of nerfs them a little bit without totally nerfing them. Once again, if you look at the versions over here, all the recent versions are for 1.23. You would need to get the 1.1 R4 version, which is that version just there. Now the way these work is when you click on them, you'll get a link to where you have a file to download, which is a jar file. you place that jar file in your server plugin directory, and I'll use Creeper Heal as an example. We'll save that again to the same place I saved the last one. I will then take that Creeper Heal file, you place it in your plugins folder. The next time that I run my server, you can see that Creeper Heal has now loaded itself up and has loaded into that particular world. So I was talking about versions, version 4.72, version 4.72, which is the correct version for the server configuration that we have. So I'm going to close these down now, and what I'm going to do is just really quickly show about configurations. So you can see in here you have lots of different files. These YML files are generally configuration files. So you can see under permissions there is nada, not a thing. And basically what that is I have no permissions configured on this server at the moment. Now you can run a server perfectly with no permissions at all, but if it's, for example, a 24/7 server that's going to be connected online that's not whitelisted, you would probably want to configure permissions to limit the amount of things that people can do when they connect to your server. If we go now into something that's, I guess, reasonably important as well, if we go into plugins, there are folders created for each plugin. So if we go into Creeper Heal now, you can see that there is a config file in there. If we double click on that and bring it up, this is where you get all your different options for how Creeper Heal works. So you can configure those options to your heart's content to make them work the way that you want them to, and that will allow you to configure that particular mod. You can do the same thing with the other plugins, World Edit, Recipe Manager. They all have their own configuration files that you can tweak it to exactly how you want your server to work. I've pretty much covered everything I can think of. I've covered plugins, I've covered Java configuration, memory configuration, basic server setup, really briefly talked about Hamachi. If there's anything anyone would like, please post it in the comments and I'm happy to help. Thank you very much for listening. Astocky out.